Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the brand new edition of To The Point with your host Kriti Mishra. And on today's show, we have a very special guest with us, Professor K. VijayRaghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India. Sir, welcome to Sansad television and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's talk about today's development. Stressing that there cannot be any vaccine nationalism, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has urged the nations to share technologies on COVID vaccines amid this pandemic. What is your take, Professor Raghavan?
See, this is a very important issue at a time, and the technology sharing, in my opinion, should not be only for vaccines, but for every technology related to COVID. Because this situation is such now that if India is safe, the world will be safe. Now, why is this technology sharing meaningful? Many people say that what is the point of sharing the technology if you cannot use it? India is unusual in that it has industries which can actually use the technology well. So it is not only about IP sharing, but technology sharing, transfer in a manner which can be made effective. This will allow many vaccine companies already in India, or companies capable of manufacturing vaccines, of which there are several, and others which are capable of manufacturing other critical equipment to ramp up for being effective in India and abroad.
Absolutely, sir. And we understand that India has undertaken the vaccination drive on a scale of billions of people, making it the most complex factor of all. But what are the challenges that lie ahead? How do we ramp up production?
You know, ramping up production, many people think, is relatively simple. I have one manufacturing plant, I have to copy it and make another. But this kind of approach or viewpoint doesn't take into account the critical aspect of quality control and people for quality control and scaling up. Quite often, as you scale, the mechanisms of quality control start becoming very frail and sensitive and need greater attention. Every single batch, remember, has to be perfect. You can't compromise on some. So manufacturing is not just about equipment and factories and space and money, it's also about people. So it does scale up, our companies are doing it, but it will go in a manner which assures quality and therefore will not scale exponentially. What is scaling exponentially is the disease. So how do we deal with the situation while the disease is scaling exponentially and vaccines are scaling linearly? The answer to that lies in us. We can keep distance effectively, even in our most difficult contexts, by masking and other measures, and prevent human-to-human transmission or greatly reduce it. That will scale down exponentially the spread of the disease. So if we want to help vaccination, we must also keep distance and make that very, very effective.
All right, sir, but the trajectory of COVID-19 infections in India, that has become a matter of concern. Has the flattening of the curve started in few states? Because we are seeing that cases in certain states, they're declining. Is this the peak of the second wave?
You know, we must keep in mind the way the second wave will likely decline. Its huge intensity and very rapid rise will be similarly seen in a very rapid fall. But that fall will not be, you've reached the top of Everest, you're not going to jump all the way down immediately. You're going to jump to various steps downwards, and there will be what is called a fat tail of decline. So the decline will be rapid, but it will have significant number of cases going down. So that will stress the system for some time to come. Similarly, there will be other locations, smaller towns, cities, rural areas, where it will start picking up. So therefore, it's very important that while we take every measure to increase hospital infrastructure in those locations, we must really prevent a surge of that kind in those locations, and therefore distancing is again important.
But sir, during the first week, we saw that after September, probably it started to decline. Do you look at some kind of timeline, or do you suggest that this is when we may witness a decline in the curve?
Yes, very sharp declines, very sharp rises, we'll also see sharp declines. What happens is a very large number of people get infected, and once the pool of infected people is very large, and if they're isolated from others, the virus will now start declining in its infectivity and transmission. But we must also keep in mind, as we saw last time, that there will still be many people who are not infected, and therefore, if they come out now, they will be open to subsequent infection. There will be some amount of immune evasiveness. All of this, there could be new variants. All this can contribute to a third wave. We must be very, very careful, and the only way, again, is to keep distancing while vaccination ramps up.
So probably there's this growing chorus for imposition of nationwide lockdown as the COVID wave has also engulfed smaller cities. What is your take, Professor Raghavan?
The point over here is that what is it that we want to achieve? And then to see what kind of a lockdown is needed. We want to achieve a break in transmission. Therefore, we want to have situations where people don't come in contact significantly with other people or they have bubbles. And therefore, that needs to be done in every area where the surge is high, where it's likely to go up, and a different strategy for places where it is low now, which are unfortunately small in number. So to do this, at the same time have mechanisms by which people's food and shelter and other kinds of care is also taken into account, would be the purposes of clampdowns or lockdowns or local lockdowns or regional lockdowns. So these measures have to be taken very strictly, and they have to be taken in a context-dependent manner. Imagine a national lockdown which were done,
Yes.
and you put with the same blunt instrument a place of one kind and a place of another kind. That is one kind of a solution. Is that the right kind now, or multiple very strong regional lockdowns in a context-dependent manner is what people will be discussing, are discussing.
All right, so then what is the way ahead? Should states look at their localized strategies?
But there's no question that, even within the current situation, states have done just that. You have seen lockdowns in
Yes.
Karnataka, in Delhi, in other places, in other districts. Of course, states are doing that. The challenge is that, certain kinds of approaches, such as night curfews or weekend lockdowns, they have a symbolic value in that they alert people that they have to be careful. But you cannot lock down the virus for 2 days a week and then say, okay, you are free to do it 5 days a week. The virus doesn't listen to us then.
Yeah.
So it is important, no matter whether there is a formal lockdown or not in our context, that we must, as individuals, as groups of individuals, as housing societies, as districts, cities, take very strong measures. Double mask, stay far from each other, and be very, very careful.
Absolutely, sir. But we understand that it was absolutely difficult to have predicted this suddenness and severity of the second COVID surge. But sir, was it inevitable? What were the chances of anticipation? That's what a lot of experts are asking.
We had all anticipated a second wave, and right during and after the first wave. And I've also said this in multiple interviews, preparations were on to prepare for a second wave. Now, there are two important factors to be kept here. One, all the predictions about the size of the second wave, right, were much that it was lower or at best at the same about the first wave until the time when the wave was actually upon us. So no one predicted this kind of a surge for a variety of reasons, despite there being severe surges elsewhere in the world. And the reasons for that were, in hindsight, you can see where those lines of argument were. But one was that India already had a large number of infections, and therefore it's unlikely that you're going to get so much more, right? Now that had the problem that many people outside the government in particular, extrapolated the level of what they call herd immunity to be much more than what it was. This was not a view accepted by the government, but this was a view put out by many eminent people outside government, that there was herd immunity and you don't need to worry about the second wave size. But also, importantly, many people all over the world said that herd immunity of that kind, letting the disease roll on, was a correct strategy. The government didn't accept both of those. But there was a perception because of these kinds of views that herd immunity had attained, and many people, including people from middle and upper classes, started behaving in a manner as if the first wave was the last wave.
Yeah.
So that was an attitudinal change because of that. Now keep another point of view from another fact about the way government agencies behave. The central government works with state governments to ramp up oxygen capacity, other kinds of capacity, hospital capacity, and so on. And all of that was going on after the first wave. All those preparations, the size of that, even if the implementation was not perfect, the size of the preparation to be done was in a manner assuming that the second wave would be similar to the first wave or less. It did not imagine something 5 or 10 times more. Final point, it is not possible to prepare for a surge of this kind. You can prepare for a small tidal wave, but in a short period of time, you cannot prepare for a tsunami when it is coming at you. You can only do something, which everyone is doing now and started earlier, is to get all the auxiliary setup which you have around to move and transform it into supporting the healthcare setup. But the healthcare infrastructure itself cannot be ramped up to disproportionate levels in such short notice, nor is it possible to have healthcare infrastructure at steady state at levels which are able to meet that surge. A mechanism by which public health is strengthened hugely, but is able to draw upon auxiliary units in case of such emergencies, is what needs to be done.
So, Professor Raghavan, what made this second wave so severe than the first one?
That's a very important question. Why is it that it happened so severely? Now, the reason why the virus spreads is it's got an opportunity to spread. So, to reframe your question, what gave it such wide opportunity to spread so intensely? Now, there are three things which could have happened, and I think all three contributed. And remember, when you have, for example, 2 to the power of something, I'm not talking about the virus now, I'm talking about 2 to the power of a number, let's say 4, right? Now, what are the components which contribute to that 4? If it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, several things, and each contribute a small number. Each will claim that I contributed only a small number to 2 to the power of 4. But together it makes 2 to the power of 4, right? So 2 to the power of 2 is 4, 2 to the power of 3 is 8, right? 2 to the power of 4 is, 64,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, 16, sorry, yeah?
16, yeah, right, sir.
Yeah, that's my apologies. So now the problem is that if you look at, and so on, if you look at what contributes to this exponent, as it's called, there are three things. One is the level of immunity, which we thought we had, but we didn't have. Now that could happen because there is some escape, right? And that escape, immune escape or vaccine escape could be one cause. And how could that happen? That could happen because of a variant strain, that either the immunity itself declines or there is a variant strain which has immune escape. We know that there are variants, but we don't think they contribute hugely to immune escape or vaccine escape. There might be a little bit, and vaccines will still be effective because they will still prevent severe disease, if not mild disease. So that could be one aspect, the variants, the level of immunity. And the third factor, of course, is the extent of compliance amongst us at every level about behavior. If that becomes lax, that's an enormous. So vaccines, more people being infectable, as well as variants contributing to that enormously.
All right, so what are the immediate, the intermediate, and the long-range measures to contain this virus, sir?
Now, the immediate measures, of course, are what people are doing. Make sure that the hospital infrastructure is ramped up, auxiliary units come, hotels, other kinds of facilities, attached hospitals, all those come in a big way. All the resources which are needed, oxygen concentrators, oxygen cylinders, and oxygen availability of all kinds, manufacturing units are there not only in the places where the surge is there or coming down, but potentially where it's going up. So that's one. The hospital and care structure is a very big aspect immediately. The second aspect in the immediate to medium term is ramping up vaccination. There's been a massive opening up of vaccination. India is both ramping up its manufacturing, which I mentioned in the beginning, but it's also buying vaccines, and that combination will result in vaccination programs steadily going up. That will take a little longer, and so that's the middle term. But again, in the immediate to middle term is behavior. That needs to change enormously as a natural aspect of our lives for a long time to come, until we finish vaccinating to scale. That message needs to go out there. Now, finally, in the long term, what we need to do is very, very important. And these are all very important lessons we have learned both in India and all over the world. Our public healthcare system needs to be much, much more ramped up at the high end. It's not just about beds and routine healthcare, but it's clear that in a pandemic situation, even to deal with modest size waves, you need to have a response system which is higher. How do we do that? You do it in a combination of having equipment, but equipment is not enough. You need people. So you need to train people locally. How do you train people to scale? So you must have training programs which meet people individually and train them, but also tele-training programs. So these are the kinds of things which need to be in the long term so that public healthcare can be better, surveillance can be better, response can be faster, and if waves come of such size, we can pull on other kinds of ancillary units to come.
But Professor Raghavan, do we have an understanding of what could be the proportion of reinfections in India now?
We are getting that idea right now. We are seeing, and those results are being published, we are seeing there are two kinds of reinfections, as it were, which we should look at. One is infections after having got the disease in the first round, how many people get that? And second, how many people are infected after having been vaccinated? Particularly since healthcare workers and frontline workers were vaccinated early, it's possible to get that. From both these, what is turning out is that the possibility for reinfections are low, but they are there. Yeah. And usually reinfections lead to moderate disease at most, sometimes to severe disease with a low frequency. Now, why is there reinfection? We don't know that. Is it because of waning immunity alone, or was it because of the intensity of the previous infection being low? Did that matter? Were there people who were moderately immune but asymptomatic? Do they behave differently from people who are earlier, moderately infected but asymptomatic? Do they behave differently from people who are infected heavily? So we don't know that answer yet. But yes, reinfection is a small context, but we have to watch out. So people who have been infected earlier shouldn't assume that they are fine. It could vary. They should protect themselves. Secondly, people who have been vaccinated. Now there too, there have been cases, and there's a paper out today, and more will come out, showing that those who get vaccinated can get infected, but typically almost all of them show mild to moderate disease. Right. And there will be a few who show severe disease because vaccine efficacy is not 100%.
Right, absolutely, sir. But there's also this debate on whether we need to fast track the process of clinical trials for vaccine for children. What is your take? I'd just like to understand that, sir.
So, vaccines for children are important. They have to be structured in a careful manner. And the reason is that we are in the midst of a pandemic where vaccines are available and people are being vaccinated. In that situation, when we know vaccines are effective, how do we construct trials where we give vaccines to one arm of a trial and don't give vaccines to another arm? So that kind of a classical trial placebo arm structure would not be feasible now when vaccines are there and proven effective. So there should be other careful ways of structuring vaccination for children, and there will be, careful laboratory analysis, which will also be done. Vaccination of older people who are not children but who are just mature to try and figure out how risky vaccination for children is. It's very complicated, but all indications are that the vaccines will be safe for children, but it has to be tried out in a manner different from the standard clinical trial in this situation.
So do we see that happening in India soon, sir?
Yes, I think there will be multiple agencies both here and abroad looking at this to see how they can take decisions on this. The nature of the trial, of course, as I said, is complicated.
All right, sir, before we end this conversation, given this uncharted territory, unprecedented times that we're living in, we don't know how this virus is going to spread. There may be a third, even a fourth or a fifth wave. So do we learn to live with COVID-19 now?
Humans have learned to live with many diseases, and many pandemics eventually become endemic. They become endemic when vaccination programs are large, when infections have become mild, and it is possible to give booster doses each year should there be new varieties coming in. So this will very likely happen in this case, unless we do something rash at this point as a world, which is allow carelessness in multiple levels to create new variants, new strains, which are more severe and essentially new, right? We should not allow that to happen. All precautions are being taken at every level in governments across the world and people across the world. And the vaccination program is going on across the world. So it's unlikely that will happen. But this is a very important time for us to make sure that we make this into something which is endemic in our populations at a mild level, rather than have to deal with it as a pandemic again and again.
Sir, before we wrap up, you've also unveiled the Manus Portal. Would you like to tell us about its important features?
The Manus Portal is an effort by our colleagues in the health sector, including the Armed Forces Medical College, and they have worked out a mechanism by which people, those who are affected by COVID, their relatives, others, can reach out and have mental health advice and counseling across sectors. This has been a very harrowing year and a half and very difficult, not just for families with COVID who have lost dear and dear ones, and also for others in our society, particularly those who are economically and socially very, very vulnerable. So these kinds of efforts to reach out and give counseling, both through the Manus Portal, but other ways, are very, very important for us to have ways by which people can reach out and help each other.
Absolutely, sir. Professor Raghavan, it was absolutely wonderful talking to you and knowing about these nuances and those important things and nitty-gritties. You joined us on Rajya Sabha television and shared those important insights. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.